"You're a selfish old man, Dad," Katrina said. Her voice was as cold as a January breeze coming off the coast of Rhode Island. "You're just sitting on all that dough while we're trying to get our lives started." The words just hit the kitchen table like a brick. I didn't say a word. I just looked at my daughter, wondering when she'd started talking to me like I was a loan shark and she was a desperate borrower. It was $100,000. That's what she and her fiancé, Dirk, wanted for their wedding and their new place. Not asked for, demanded. The money was my wife's pension and life insurance, which I'd left alone for years, a safety net for my golden years. But to her, it was just a big pile of cash I was hoarding to make her life more difficult. She didn't know it yet, but that little talk was the first move in a chess game she'd never see coming. Just a heads up, for 4 weeks after that, we didn't talk. My phone was as quiet as a tomb, except for random calls and Hans checking in from the hospital. My mornings were always the same. Coffee at 5:30 a.m. The local newspaper was sitting neatly on the counter, and I could smell the sea air drifting in from the port. Retirement had taught me that real peace isn't about everything being quiet. It's about not having anyone boss you around. Still, there was a weight in the stillness. Not exactly guilt, but that gnawing feeling you get when you know your kid thinks your worth is all about how much money you have. Katrina had always been the one with grand ideas, exotic vacations, perfect-looking pictures on social media, a life that looked just as good as it felt. Or maybe better. When she was just a little girl, she'd sit on the porch with her mom, Ingrid, planning a dream wedding under the big oak tree in our backyard. Back then, all she wanted was for her mom to bake the cake and for me to hang up the lights. Now, that old oak tree wasn't good enough. And neither was I. One Wednesday morning, I was out trimming the bushes in the small yard of my little cottage when my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. For a second, I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but old habits die hard. "Dad," she said, her voice a little softer, almost nervous. "I've been thinking, maybe we were both being stubborn. Can we get together for dinner?" Her voice had that careful mix of friendliness and control, like someone handling a very fragile glass sculpture. "I'd like that," I said, even though a part of me was already on alert. "My place. Dirk and I were thinking we'd take you somewhere nice. This Starlight Diner on Commerce Street. 7 o'clock. This Starlight Diner. The last time I was there was for my 25th wedding anniversary with Ingrid. Soft candlelight, quiet music, the kind of place where every dish feels special. That night, we talked about the next phase of our lives, trips we'd take, projects around the house, and how we'd spoil our future grandkids. Ingrid never got to see any of it. I ran a hand over the back of my neck, feeling the slight pull of the scar I got from my years at the shipyard. "Sure," I said. 7 o'clock. I hung up and just stood there for a minute, the pruning shears swinging from my hand, wondering why the sudden change of heart. For weeks of dead silence, and now a fancy dinner. People don't usually try to mend fences unless there's something they want to get over to the other side. The day went on as usual. Lunch at the cafe, a stop at the home improvement store, a visit to the docks where the seagulls sounded like a bunch of old sailors arguing about nothing. But underneath it all was a feeling of unease. I'd been a foreman for too long not to notice when something wasn't right. When the evening came, I pulled my gray suit out of the closet. It fit just like it always had, comfy in the shoulders, a little loose around the belly. I polished my shoes, the same ones I wore to her college graduation, and put my wedding band in the drawer next to my wallet. It was just a habit. The Starlight Diner was cozy with low lights and the smell of spices and fresh bread. The hostess, a young woman with sharp eyes and a polite smile, led me to a corner booth where Katrina was already sitting. She was glowing, the way only a pregnant woman can be, with shiny skin and perfect waves in her dark hair. Her dress was the kind you don't buy at the discount store. "Dad," she said, standing up to give me a hug. For a second, I let myself believe this was about making things right. "You look great," I said, and I meant it. "How's the baby?" "The second trimester is much easier," she said, putting a hand on her stomach. "Dirk should be here any second." I nodded, looking around the room. The Starlight Diner was half full. Couples were leaning in close. People were laughing at the bar, and the sound of silverware was muffled. A man could almost forget he was walking into a business meeting. "I'm glad you called," I said. "I've missed you." Something flashed on her face, but it was gone before I could figure out what it was. Guilt, maybe, or regret. Or just a calculation. Before I could ask about it, Dirk showed up, tall, in a fancy suit, with a smile that was a little too perfect. Behind him were three guys in dark suits carrying briefcases. It was the kind of entrance that said whatever was about to happen had been planned down to the last second. "Mr. Becker," Dirk said, pulling up a chair for himself. "Thanks for coming." The three men sat down around our small table, turning a nice dinner into a boardroom meeting. My stomach got a little tight, but I kept my face calm. "Katrina," I said slowly, "who are these gentlemen?" "They're colleagues of Dirk's," she said without looking me in the eye. "They've got some papers they want you to look at." One of the men, with gray hair and a smile like a wolf, leaned in. "Mr. Becker, I'm Klaus Werner, Dirk's lawyer. We've got some documents we think will be good for everyone." The room suddenly felt a lot warmer, even though there was a draft from the door. "What kind of documents?" I asked, even though I already knew. Dirk cleared his throat. "A power of attorney. Considering your age and the fact that you live alone, it just makes sense for someone younger to handle your finances." "My age," I repeated quietly. "I'm 73. Dirk, not 93. "Of course," he said, sounding like a know-it-all explaining a safety drill to the guy who built the place. "But things like the stock market and investments, they're complicated. You shouldn't have to worry about them." I looked at Katrina, waiting for her to say something, to tell me this wasn't what it looked like. But she just sat there with her hands in her lap, staring at the table. The lawyer pushed a folder toward me. "If you could just sign here and initial there, we can get everything taken care of tonight." I opened it. It was a power of attorney for my bank accounts, my house, my insurance policies, everything Ingrid and I had worked 45 years to build. "And if I don't sign?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Katrina finally looked up. Her eyes were colder than I'd ever seen them. "Then you won't get to see your grandson grow up. It's your choice, Dad. Grandparents' rights in this state are very limited." The music from the speakers just turned into a low hum. I stared at my daughter, the same girl who used to run around in the yard with no shoes on, chasing fireflies, and wondered when she decided to trade in dandelions for threats. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My fingers moved on their own, finding the number I'd had ready for weeks. "Hans," I said when he answered. "I need you at the Starlight Diner right now." Hans didn't ask why. He never does when I use that tone. "I'll be there," was all he said before hanging up. I slid the phone back into my pocket, letting the weight of it remind me that this table wasn't as one-sided as they thought. "We can go over the paperwork while we wait," Klaus Werner said, pushing the folder a little closer. I let my eyes rest on it for a second. The brass clip at the top was shiny in the low light. The pages were all perfectly square. No coffee stains, no wrinkles. It was put together in an office where time was money, and someone had already figured out what I was worth. "I'd rather not start anything until my son gets here," I said. My voice was calm but firm. "Family matters should involve the whole family." Dirk's smile got a little tighter. "Otto, this doesn't need to involve anyone else. We just need to get the paperwork straight so Katrina and I can make sure you're comfortable." "Comfortable?" I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking a little. I've been comfortable for a long time without anyone managing my life. Katrina shifted in her seat, looking at Dirk, then back at me. "Dad, please don't make this more difficult than it has to be. We just want to make sure things are taken care of." I took a drink of water, letting the silence stretch out until I saw one of the younger lawyers start to fidget. "The funny thing about being taken care of," I said finally. "Sometimes it means being taken over." That got me a thin smile from Werner, the kind a man gives when he thinks he's dealing with someone too soft to understand the game. "Mr. Becker, I promise you, this is just how it works. Lots of clients your age." "Stop talking about my age like it's a disease," I cut in. My voice was still low, but it had a new edge to it. The air between us changed. They weren't expecting me to fight back so soon. I watched Dirk's jaw clench and his thumb tap against his glass. Katrina was picking at the edge of her napkin, not looking at either of us. 10 minutes later, Hans walked in. You could feel his presence from across the room. His shoulders were squared, and his walk was sure. He was still in his hospital scrubs with his ID badge clipped to his pocket. He looked at the table once and knew everything he needed to know. "Evening," he said, putting a hand on my shoulder for a second before pulling up a chair. "What's going on?" "Financial planning," Dirk said smoothly, leaning back like he owned the place. "Just making sure your dad's money is handled properly for his retirement." You mean taking control of my accounts and property? I corrected. Through a power of attorney. Hans's eyes went to the folder, then to Werner. And who exactly benefits from this? Werner adjusted his tie. Mr. Becker, these decisions are always for the good of the client. Funny, Hans interrupted. I work in a place where we also make decisions for people's good. But in my job, if a patient doesn't give their informed consent, it's called malpractice. The younger lawyer stopped fidgeting and just froze. Dirk tried to laugh it off. No one's trying to hurt anyone here. You're just making sure you get what you want before the ink's even dry, Hans said. His voice was still calm, but it had an edge to it. I could see a flash of something in Dirk's eyes, annoyance, maybe even a little bit of fear. Katrina reached for her water, her hands shaking a little. Dad, she said, her voice softer now. This is for everyone's sake. We don't have to make it a fight. It's only a fight if you push, I replied. And I'm not the one doing the pushing tonight. There was a pause, the kind that makes every little sound in a room louder. The clink of a glass at the next table, the low hum of the ceiling fan. Hans turned to me. Dad, you want me to look at this paperwork? Not yet, I said. I think we should wait for Greta. Dirk's eyebrows came together. Greta, my lawyer, I said simply. That was the surprise they hadn't seen coming. Katrina blinked, like she was trying to figure out that I'd had someone on my side all along. Dirk's smile faded, the kind of slip-up a man makes when he realizes the ground isn't as solid as he thought. Werner leaned back a little, his eyes getting narrower. Maybe we should reschedule when everyone is here, he suggested, his voice not as confident as before. That's a great idea, I agreed, then looked at my watch. She should be here any minute. Hans sat back, crossing his arms, happy to let the silence work against them. And it did. The younger lawyers avoided eye contact. Dirk checked his phone twice in under a minute, and Katrina just stared at the tablecloth like it had all the answers she needed. It wasn't long before the hostess showed up at our table. Mr. Becker, she said, there's a Mrs. Bauer here to see you. I stood up, feeling the weight in my chest go from being tense to something more steady. Send her over, I said. Greta Bauer walked in like she'd been there 100 times, even though I knew she'd never set foot in the Starlight Diner before. 67 years old, with neat, short gray hair, and a dark suit that fit like it was made just for her. She had a slim leather briefcase in her left hand, and her right hand was free to shake hands or point a finger, whatever was needed. Evening, Otto, she said, her voice steady and warm, like we were just two old friends meeting for dinner. She turned to Hans with a nod. You must be the doctor's son I've heard about. Hans stood up and shook her hand. And you must be the lawyer my dad's been keeping in his back pocket. Greta smiled at that, a quick flash of amusement before she focused on the rest of the table. And who might you all be? Klaus Werner cleared his throat. Klaus Werner, representing Mr. Schmidt here. And he pointed to the younger men, giving names that I forgot as soon as he said them. Greta gave each of them a polite nod, but her eyes were cold. Gentlemen, I understand you have some papers for my client. Dirk shifted in his seat. Mrs. Bauer, this is a family matter. We just wanted to help Otto manage his money in a way that's efficient. Greta put her briefcase on the table, unlatched it with a sharp click, and pulled out a folder twice as thick as the one in front of me. I'm sure you did, she said evenly. But before we talk about your efficiency, I think it's important you see what's already in place. She slid the folder toward me, though it was clear she wanted the other side of the table to see it. Dirk's eyes got narrow. What's this? An irrevocable trust, Greta replied, sounding as if she were explaining the dessert menu. It was set up 2 weeks ago. All of Otto's major assets, his home, his investment accounts, his life insurance policies, are now in a trust for his children, with Hans as the trustee until any grandchildren turn 28. For a second, the table was silent except for the faint scraping of a fork from across the room. Dirk just blinked. That can't be changed. Not without the trustee's approval, Greta said. And definitely not without mine, since I wrote it up. Werner leaned forward. Why wasn't I told about this? Because you don't represent my client, she said simply. And because Otto doesn't owe you or Mr. Schmidt any warning about how he protects his own stuff. Katrina finally looked up, her voice tight. Dad, why would you do that without telling me? I kept my eyes on her. Because the last time we talked, you acted like my savings were something you were just entitled to. That told me everything I needed to know about how I should protect what your mother and I built. You're overreacting, she said quickly. We just wanted control. I finished for her. Let's not pretend this dinner was about making up. The younger of the two junior lawyers looked at Werner, clearly uncomfortable. Greta wasn't done yet. Walter also asked me to look into some things happening in his neighborhood. Strangely enough, a gentleman matching Mr. Schmidt's description was seen taking pictures of Otto's house, talking to his neighbors, and asking about his mental state. That got my attention. Dirk shifted in his seat, but Greta kept going before he could say anything. We also found emails between Mr. Schmidt and a private investigator about Otto's health history and daily routine. I trust you have a good explanation. Werner's face got dark. Mr. Schmidt, is this true? Dirk's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. I was just being proactive, making sure there weren't any signs of him being unable to manage things. Hans's voice cut in, sharper now. You were trying to build a case to take over my father's life before you even married my sister. Katrina's voice shook. Dirk, you told me it was just to make sure Dad was okay. Katrina, I said quietly. I've been okay for a long time. But I wouldn't be if I'd signed what they brought tonight. Greta leaned back, putting her hands together. Given this information, I would tell Mr. Becker not to sign anything from your side tonight or ever. And I'd also advise you, Mr. Schmidt, to think about the possible legal trouble you could be in for lying about your intentions to your fiancée and her family. That hit them hard. Dirk's face got tight, but he didn't say anything. Werner cleared his throat again, this time with less confidence. Maybe we should put off any more discussion until everyone has had a chance to look at these new developments. An excellent idea, Greta said, closing her briefcase with another sharp click. Otto, I think we're done here. I stood up, my chair scraping softly against the floor, and looked at Katrina. When you're ready to talk about family without bringing lawyers and ultimatums, you know where to find me. I didn't look at Dirk, but I could feel his eyes on me as Hans and I walked toward the door with Greta beside us. At the coat check, Greta handed me my jacket. You handled that well, she said. You had my back, I replied. That was enough. You'll still need to be careful, she warned. Guys like him don't just walk away quietly when they see an inheritance disappear. I nodded. I'm counting on it. It wasn't me trying to sound tough. It was the truth. I'd spent my life fixing machines that broke. A few days back, a plain envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, no nothing. Inside was just a piece of paper, typed out. It said we could still fix things. Told me to come to the old pier around 9 o'clock Friday night, by myself. Didn't have a signature, but I knew who it was from. I got Helga on the phone. Should I go? I asked her. She paused for a second. You don't go anywhere without Klaus and me knowing about it, she said. But yeah, you go? Let's see what he's willing to offer when he thinks he's got you trapped. Friday rolled around, and it was a nasty evening, cold and windy. The kind of night that keeps most people inside. The old pier was groaning under my boots as I walked to the end of it, my hands stuffed into my pockets. Hans was already there, leaning against a post, his pricey coat all buttoned up. So you came, he said, sounding a bit surprised, like he was relieved. I'm here, I shot back. What's so important? He looked around like he was in some kind of spy movie. You've got to talk to Frida. She won't listen to me anymore. This whole thing with my license, it's political. I just need a little breathing room. If you could just let go of some of those funds. Not happening, I said, plain and simple. His face got tight. You're making a mistake. This isn't just about me. It's about your grandson. And it's about protecting him from people who think like you. I countered. For a moment, all you could hear was the wind. Then he took a step closer. You're not as untouchable as you think, Gunther. Everyone's got a weak spot. I just stared at him, not blinking. And yours is thinking that mine is you. He was the first to look away. When I got back to the truck, I called Helga and gave her the whole rundown. She was quiet for a bit. Then she said, that was his last play. Now we just watch him fold. By Monday morning, the whole thing blew up. Hans was back in the business paper, but this time they weren't being nice about it. The headline read, State Licensing Board suspends Miller Realty license pending investigation. The smaller headline talked about a whole bunch of client complaints and the possibility of criminal charges being handed over to the district attorney's office. There was a picture of him coming out of the board's office downtown, head down, with his collar pulled up. Frida was right behind him, a couple of steps back, with her sunglasses on even though the sky was gray. I cut that one out too. Not because I was being petty, just because it's a habit. Paper trails tell the real story better than memory ever can. By noon, I had 3 voicemails from Frida. The first one was tense and defensive. Dad, you don't get it. This will all blow over. We just have to get through a couple of weeks. The second was shorter. Can we talk? I mean, just us, no Helga. The third was quieter, like her voice was about to crack. I don't know what to do. I didn't call her back right away. Instead, I sent all 3 messages to Helga. 10 minutes later, she called. She's starting to pull away from him. That's when we need to be the quietest. Make her sit in the silence until she can hear her own thoughts over his. The next afternoon, Klaus came by on his way home from the hospital. He set his phone on the table, face up. You need to hear this, he said. It was a message from Frida, sent to him. I think I messed up, she said. Hans has been lying to me about the clients, the money, even about you and Dad. He told me you two were scheming to cut me out completely, and now I think he just didn't want me asking questions. Her voice broke on the last word. Klaus watched me as the message ended. She's scared, Dad, and I think she's finally seeing him for what he really is. Or, I said, thinking it over, she's seeing what he's become and realizing it's a problem for her. Klaus leaned back. Either way, she's not sticking up for him anymore. That's a start. That night, I was cleaning up in the kitchen after dinner when the motion light on the porch went on. I checked the camera feed. It was Frida, all alone. She stood there for a long time before knocking 3 quick times, the way she used to when she came home from college on weekends. I opened the door. She looked worn out, in a way I'd never seen before, like the burden she was carrying was heavy, not just in her head, but in her body. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice soft. Come on in. She came inside, looking at the photos on the table in the hallway. Her mom, Klaus in his Little League uniform, and the 3 of us on a fishing trip a while back. I wasn't sure you'd answer, she said. That's why you knocked instead of calling, I said with a small smile. Maybe. We sat at the kitchen table, the very same one where she'd called me selfish a few weeks ago. For a moment, we just sat there quietly. Then she took a deep breath. You were right about him. I didn't say anything, letting her say it out loud. That was more important than me agreeing. I thought he just wanted to protect me, protect us. But he's been protecting himself. The money he wanted from you wasn't for the wedding or the place. It was to fill in gaps, holes. I don't even know how big. She looked down at her hands. He asked me to get you to write a letter for him. Said it would help with his case. I didn't tell him no, but I didn't say yes. I didn't know what to do. That's why you've been calling. She nodded. I need help, Dad. Not just with him, but with me. I've made a mess. It would have been easy to just give in right there and say, you're still my daughter, and make everything okay. But lessons that aren't learned have a way of coming back around. Frida, I said, what happens next is up to you. Not to Hans, not to me. You're the one who has to decide where you stand. She nodded again, slower this time. If I walk away from him, can I stay here for a while? The question surprised me, not because of the space. I had plenty, but because of what it meant. This wasn't just her backing away from Hans. This was her moving toward me, on my terms. You can't, I said, but we have rules. No talk about the trust, no talk about my accounts. And if you stay without him. Not even a visit. You break that rule once, and you're out. I get it. And Frida, I added, if you think I'm paying for that wedding after all this, then you don't understand me at all. For the first time all night, she smiled. It was small and tired, but it was real. I'm not asking. She stayed 2 nights in the guest room, quiet and polite, helping with the dishes like she used to. On the 3rd morning, I came down and found a note on the kitchen counter. Dad, thank you. I'm going to talk to a lawyer today. Not yours, don't worry. I just need to make things official. I'll call you when I'm ready. The real surprise came an hour later. Helga called. Hans just got served with a notice from the district attorney's office. They're starting a criminal investigation. Fraud, stealing funds, the whole shebang. I let out a slow breath. So it begins. Helga's voice was dry. Gunther, I think it's ending. 2 days after Helga's call, the news was on the evening TV. It wasn't just the business paper anymore. It was local news anchors reading from a teleprompter, showing footage of Hans walking into the courthouse with his lawyer. No Frida in sight. The headline on the screen read, former real estate broker facing criminal investigation for alleged fraud, misappropriation of client funds. They said alleged because they had to, But the DA's tone in the press conference made it clear he wasn't just looking for attention. He was going for a conviction. I watched the segment twice, not because I was enjoying it, but because I wanted to catch every single detail. The list of charges, the mention of potential witness interviews, and the fact that the DA's office was asking anyone with information to come forward. Helga called before the segment was over. "Gunther, we're in a position to choose here. We can just be quiet and watch, or we can make sure they get the full story about his attempts with you." "I'll give them everything," I said. "Every document, every recording, every photograph. If they're going to take him down, I want it to be for all of it, not just the pieces they can already see." The next morning, I met Helga at her office. She'd set it up for an investigator from the DA's team to be there, a guy in his 50s who looked like he'd spent way too many hours in interrogation rooms. I laid out the file, the copy of the power of attorney they tried to shove across the table at Schmidt's, the investigator's report on Hans's background checks into my money and my mental state, the pictures he took of my house, and the security video of a guy who moved just like Hans creeping around my porch. The investigator listened without saying a word, just scribbling notes every so often. When I was done, he closed the folder. "This is strong," he said, "especially the combination, financial pressure, legal tricks, and physical presence at your home. It shows a clear intent." After he left, Helga leaned back in her chair. "He's going to be desperate now, and desperate people call in favors, try to make deals, and lean on anyone who will listen. That includes Frida." "She's still at her place?" I asked. "She's been avoiding him since she left your house, but he'll try to get to her, if only to control what she says in court." That evening, Frida called. No voicemail this time. I picked up on the fourth ring. "Dad, he's been showing up outside my building," she said. Her voice was shaking, but she wasn't panicking. It was more like she'd been holding her breath for too long. "He's not yelling or anything, just waiting, watching. I think he wants me to feel trapped." "Do you?" "Not anymore," she said. "I called the police tonight and filed a report." That wasn't the twist I expected, but it was the one I'd been hoping for. A sign she was finally starting to stand up for herself without waiting for me to step in. 2 days later, Helga sent me a scanned copy of a restraining order. Frida had gone to court and gotten it against Hans, forbidding him from contacting her or coming near her. "Your daughter is learning," Helga said. The next surprise came later that week when Klaus stopped by after his shift. "You're not going to believe who came to see me at the hospital today," he said, dropping into a kitchen chair. "One of Hans's old clients. She knew my name from the news and knew I was your son. She wanted to tell me something off the record." "What?" "She said Hans has been telling people you're paying for his defense, that you've forgiven him and are helping him out because of the baby." I felt the anger flare up in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "Let him say it. Every lie he tells now will look a lot worse when the truth comes out." And it would come out. The DA's investigator called that Friday to say Hans had been officially charged and brought before a judge. Bail was set high, too high for him to pay without selling off his stuff, assuming he had anything left to sell. Frida's name was on the witness list. Mine was, too. That night, I sat on the porch watching the streetlights come on, thinking about all the things that had led to this. The kitchen conversation where she called me selfish, the dinner at Schmidt's, the smell of cigarette smoke in my house, the grainy video of a hooded figure in my yard. It had all led to this quiet evening where, for the first time in months, it felt like the fight was completely in my favor. But I was smart enough to know it wasn't over. Guys like Hans don't just fade away. They try to make one last desperate move. And when he did, I planned to be ready. The courthouse had that same smell of wood polish and old coffee. That mix never changes, no matter what town you're in. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my suit ironed, and my tie knotted the way Ingrid always liked it. Tight, even, with a little dimple right under the knot. Helga was next to me, her case file stacked in 3 neat piles. Across the way, Hans's table looked like a mess. Papers were everywhere, his briefcase was half open, and his lawyer couldn't decide whether to glare at us or keep whispering to his client. Hans didn't look like the big shot who used to strut into restaurants. He looked smaller, his shoulders slumped, his tie a bit crooked. Frida wasn't sitting with him. She was on the witness list for our side. When the judge came in, everyone stood up. "Be seated," he said, and the trial began. Helga started with a simple story. A man, almost 70, who lost his wife and was targeted by his daughter's fiancé under the lie of helping with a wedding and a new apartment. She walked the jury through the timeline. Frida's demand for the $50,000, the failed dinner meeting, the sudden legal papers, and the weird visits to my place. Then she started bringing out the documents I'd given her, the drafts of the power of attorney, the real estate transfer forms, and even the security photos. The defense tried to stop her every time, but most of their objections didn't work. The jury's eyes were on me when I got on the stand. I told them what happened in simple terms. No drama, just dates, places, and what was said. My voice didn't shake when I explained that my pension and insurance were my safety net, not a prize for someone to win. I could feel Hans watching me the whole time, like he was trying to find a hole in my story. There wasn't one. When it was Frida's turn, she came in with her hair pulled back, no jewelry, and a calm look I hadn't seen since before she met him. She told the court about the pressure, how he tricked her, and how Hans tried to make her believe that I was just being difficult out of spite. She didn't look at him until the very last line of her testimony. He made me choose between my father and him. I chose my father. That was the twist. I hadn't expected her to say it so clearly. Not here. Not for the court record. For a second, Hans's face fell, just a tiny bit, but it was enough to tell me that it had hit him hard. The defense tried to switch gears, painting Hans as a guy who was just trying to bring the family's money together for the future, but the DA's investigator tore that idea apart. He walked the jury through the bank records, showing how Hans moved client money into his personal accounts and how those withdrawals were linked to down payments on properties that were never actually sold. By the time the final arguments came, it wasn't a question of whether Hans was guilty. It was about how bad the consequences would be. Helga's voice was solid as she told the jury, "This isn't just about money. It's about every person's right, no matter how old they are, to live without being taken advantage of by the people they should be able to trust the most." The jury didn't even take 3 hours to decide. Guilty on a bunch of charges: fraud, attempted coercion, harassment. Sentencing was set for the next month, but the judge didn't wait to lock him up. Hans was let out in handcuffs, his lawyer still picking up the papers from the table. As the courtroom emptied, Frida came over. For a moment, we just stood there, not saying anything. Then she said, "You were right, Dad, about everything." I didn't brag. Didn't say "I told you so." I just nodded and said, "Now you know." Helga packed up the files and handed me a sealed envelope. "From the clerk's office," she said. Inside was the court order, putting all my assets back under my full protection, pension, insurance, property, and getting rid of any claim Hans might have tried to sneak in during the whole mess. That night, back home, I poured myself a single glass of whiskey and sat in Ingrid's chair. Outside, the street was quiet. In the stillness, I thought about the game Hans had started and how it ended, not with me yelling, but with him in handcuffs and my daughter finally seeing the truth. But I also knew the 10th part wasn't about him. It was about what I would do now that the fight was over. The first morning after the trial, I woke up without that weight on my chest that had been there for months. No court dates, no lawyers to call, no folders stacked on the kitchen table. I made my coffee the slow way, the way Ingrid used to like it, letting the kettle hiss and steam before pouring. The house was quiet, but it wasn't that heavy quiet I'd gotten used to. It was a clean quiet, the kind that leaves room to think. I sat by the window with my mug and looked out at the maple tree in the yard. The leaves had just started to change color, the edges turning gold where the sun hit them. The seasons had kept going while I was stuck in that fight, and I realized I had almost missed them. By noon, I'd driven out to the lake. The water was still, just small ripples rolling to shore. I hadn't been back since before Frida's demands, before Hans's schemes. This was where I used to fish with her when she was a kid, her legs dangling off the dock, her hair flying in the wind. I sat there for a long time, remembering, not in a bitter way, but just like a guy taking stock of what's behind him before moving forward. My phone buzzed once. It was Frida. The message was short. "Dinner this week. Just you and me." I stared at it for a second. I didn't reply right away. Not because I didn't want to see her, but because I needed to let the thought sink in. Relationships, once they crack, don't just glue back the same way. But sometimes you don't need them to be the same. You just need them to be real. That evening, I took the box down from the top shelf in the closet. Inside was the life insurance paperwork, the pension statements, and a single page I'd written months ago, my updated will. Helga had helped me set it up, so there would be no way around it. No easy tricks for anyone to use. Frida was still in it, but with some rules, things she would have to do, choices she'd have to make to prove she could be trusted. The rest went to the causes Ingrid had cared about: the library, the shelter, the scholarship fund at the high school. For the first time, I didn't worry about what would happen when I was gone. The next Sunday, I went to church, not just because it was a habit, but because I wanted to hear the hymns again. The same people who had been giving me sad looks during the trial now shook my hand with a quiet kind of respect. They didn't ask for details. They didn't need to. In a small town, news gets around faster than the truth. After the service, I walked the long way home, past the old train station, the bakery, and the park where Ingrid used to read on the bench by the fountain. I thought about how much of life is made up of these ordinary places, and how easy it is to forget how much they're worth when you're too busy defending yourself from someone else's greed. That night, I built a fire in the fireplace and just watched the flames. People think revenge is about the moment you win the case, the handcuffs, the other guy's face when he realizes he lost. But that's not what it is. The real revenge is waking up in your own bed in your own house with your life still yours to live, and knowing the people who try to take it from you are out of moves. Frida came by the next evening. No makeup, her hair down, just a container of stew in her hands. She set it on the counter and said, "I know this doesn't fix anything, but I wanted to start somewhere." We ate without rushing, talking about small things: the neighbor's new puppy, the weather, the maple tree out front. When she left, she hugged me. Not the kind of hug people give because they have to, but the kind where you hold on for a second longer than you usually would. Later, as I locked the door, I realized I didn't feel the need to protect every single part of my life anymore. I had taken the hits, stood my ground, and walked away with what really mattered. The pension and the house and the memories were still there. But more importantly, so was I. I poured a small glass of whiskey and sat by the window again. The night was cool. The crickets were chirping steadily in the grass. Somewhere in the dark, I thought I could hear the faint sound of the lake lapping against the dock. I raised my glass, not to Hans, not even to the trial, but to the quiet, to the fact that I had chosen exactly what to keep and exactly what to let go. Some losses aren't meant to be fixed. Some relationships aren't meant to be what they once were. But dignity, once you get it back, has a way of making everything else not matter. And in the end, that was enough. I wasn't ready to get back into the game, not with the main event just over. But as a new week began, the quiet of the house got to me. It wasn't the good quiet anymore, but the kind that starts to feel like a big space you've got to fill. So I did what I always do when I need to clear my head. I went to the hardware store. It's a small place over on 3rd Street, and the smell of sawdust and fresh paint always makes me feel like things are getting done, even when they're not. I grabbed a few cans of sealant for the deck and a new lock for the side gate. Just small jobs, things I'd been putting off. I was at the checkout when I saw Klaus. He was buying a new doorknob for his clinic. He looked at me, gave a little nod, and then he said, "I got a call this morning. From Frida. Is everything all right?" I asked. She's still with that lawyer, getting everything sorted. But she asked me if I'd be a character witness for her. I was a bit taken aback. A character witness for what? For her getting a new license. She wants to be a real estate agent again, but she wants to do it on her own, without any ties to Hans or his old business. She said she's not just learning from her mistakes. She's trying to prove she's a different person now. I was quiet for a moment. This was a whole new kind of courage. "What did you say?" I said yes, Klaus replied. "But I told her to ask you too. She's got to ask you herself." I didn't hear from her for 3 days. Then, a text. "Are you free for coffee tomorrow? My treat." I replied, "Sure. 2 p.m. at Miller's." We met at the coffee shop downtown. It was a bit odd, the same place I'd sat with Helga so many times, talking about the very things that had now brought Frida here. She got there first, and she was already drinking her coffee when I walked in. She looked tired, but in a different way. Not exhausted from carrying a weight, but tired from doing the hard work to put it down. "Thanks for coming, Dad," she said. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, and a small smile touched her lips. We talked for a while about the weather and the old bakery she used to love. Then she took a deep breath. "I'm applying for a new real estate license. I've told them the whole story about Hans, about what I did. I even told them about the money I took from you. I want to show them I'm being honest." "And I asked. They said I need character references. People who can vouch for me. People who know what happened. Klaus already said yes. She looked down into her coffee. I need you too, Dad. I just looked at her, at my daughter, who had made a mess and was now trying to clean it up herself. Frida, I said, I'll do it. But you have to promise me something. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you can't stand on your own 2 feet again. You've got to be your own person, your own woman. You can't depend on anyone else to make you feel right. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the real Frida. The girl who used to catch frogs at the lake and wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. I promise, Dad, she said, her voice shaking just a little. I swear it. I wrote the letter for her that night. I didn't hold anything back. I wrote about what happened, about the trust, about the trial. But I also wrote about her taking responsibility, about her courage to admit she was wrong. It was a different kind of ending to a story, but maybe it was the only one that truly mattered. Epilogue. The seasons turned again, and the maples were a fiery red. Hans's sentencing was a few weeks later. I didn't go. Helga went for me and called me after. She told me he got a long sentence, and the judge made a statement about people using their family ties to exploit others. It was what we expected. A few months after that, I got a letter from Frida. It was a simple note. I got my license, Dad. Thanks for everything. I'm moving into a new apartment, and I'm selling houses in a different part of the city. I didn't hear from her again for a while, and that was okay. We didn't need to talk every day. We just needed to know we were in a good place. Sometimes, the quiet is what you need the most. The quiet gives you time to heal, time to remember who you were before the fight started. One day, I was at the lake, sitting on the old dock, and I watched a young couple with their little girl. She was swinging her legs just like Frida used to. The sun was going down, and the water was golden. I thought about the game, about the fight, and about how much I'd won. Not money, not power, but something much more valuable. I won my life back, and I won my daughter back, too. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all.